Hello and welcome to my tutorial for the little bird lady. The pattern is available for free to everyone on my Patreon or buy me a coffee. So you don't have to be a member. If you don't have the pattern yet, quickly go to one of the pages. I'll link them in the description. And print out the pages and we can get started. First, transfer the pattern to the fabric and cut out the pieces. I have a few color variations here, but you don't have to use them. That's entirely up to you. But if you use them, can you either make them from two different parts and sew them together, or just sew them on like I did in this case? I use some glue to support it so that it doesn't slip while sewing. I do this with all parts. Also the eyes. If you have an embroidery machine, you can of course also embroider them and sew it in place. First, I sew the feathers together from the butt. There are 3 pieces, one middle and 2 side ones. Fur fabric or plushy fabric slips very easily when sewing together. Therefore, pin it well with pins. Do not sew a small part of the feathers together. This makes it easier to turn later. The seam allowance can now be cut off. You can always do that. The leftovers can be mixed well with the filling material, so there is hardly any waste. Now turn the feathers to the right side so that the outside of the fabric actually faces outwards, and sew the rest together at the bottom using the ladder stitch. The feather is now finished, but you can optionally make a decorative seam. To do this, simply sew along the middle of the feeder. When you have finished all 3 feathers, attach them to the bottom part with a few stitches so that they no longer slip away. The wings are next. Sew the large pieces together first. The part at the top must remain free and must not be sewn together. The small part on the side can be sewn shut, but it doesn't have to be. Now turn from left to right. Use the sewing machine to add a few decorative seams. This not only looks pretty, but also makes the wing flatter. Now the arm O and arm U parts are sewn onto the finished wing part. First, only sew it together where all 4 layers of fabric touch. If you want, you can add some wire to the arm parts. This ultimately makes the wings movable. Use some adhesive tape to wrap around the pointed ends of the wire so that they don't stick out of the fabric afterwards. The whole thing is now closed again with a ladder stitch, and the wings are finished. Now the 2 wings are sewn into the back part. As always, do this with both sides. Then the dart is sewn together on the belly part. That makes the part more rounded, just like a stomach should be. The two back parts are now sewn together. Once that's done, the belly part comes into play again, and everything is sewn together. Now we have a kind of arm ring with wings. Looks good too. This part is actually not that important, but I just love little details. If you want, you can skip it, as the claws are sewn in by hand anyway and you have more control that way. If you want, you can sew all the claw darts together. Since we're already on the subject of the claws, the next step is of course the feet, or rather, the whole leg of the bird lady. Sew the foot part to the first leg part, and then immediately to the other leg part. The whole thing can then be sewn up at the back. Just sew it up once and we'll get the claws. We now have 3 claws. Here you can see all the parts that belong together. Let's start with the bee claw. As already mentioned, you sew the small white part in by hand. If you're really good, you can of course do it with a sewing machine. Once the claw is in place, you can sew the whole thing back up. This is what it all looks like. Now do the same with the A claw and the C claw. When everyone is finished, sew the A and C claws to the B claw, and then put the piece aside for now. Now the sole part is sewn to the almost finished leg. Once that's done and all the pieces are turned over to the right side, all you have to do is connect them together. It's best to sew everything in place at the top and leave the bottom part that touches the slow piece unstitched. Now you can fill the foot perfectly and then sew the whole thing closed again by hand using the ladder stitch. Now the 2 hip parts are sewn together. The foot now goes into the hole in one part and is best sewn on again by hand. Looks good, right? Nice leg. The bottom part now goes on the body arm ring with the wings. Sew everything together nicely. Now the 2 leg holes are free. Time to sew the 2 legs on. This is best done by hand. The body is now finished. Finally, time for your head. First come the 2 mouth parts, and then the hair part. If you have 2 different colors, you can do the same as with the others. Back to the beak. Beak is now sewn to both beak S parts. Some of the beak S pieces also need to be sewn together. Keep that in mind. When that's done, the lower part of the beak comes on. Here the darts have to be closed first. Once this is done, both parts can be sewn together. The upper and lower parts of the beak are now sewn together. The mouth part is then sewn in. Theoretically, she can now talk. Now both face parts are sewn together. These are then sewn together with the back head. Now it's the turn of the eyes. First, the darts have to be sewn together. Nice and round, right? Once this is done, you can sew both eye parts together. These are then sewn together with the face part. Once this is done, the beak is sewn to the head. The neck part is now sewn to the head. When all this is done, the hairpiece can be inserted and the head can be sewn shut. Now we have a head and a body. Both parts can now be stuffed with fiberfill. Once that's done, all that's left to do is sew the head to the body and our little bird lady is ready. Unless you want a little extra detail, then you can do a few decorative stitches by hand on the beak. Looks good too, right? Now I wish you a lot of fun with your new plushie. Until the next free pattern tutorial. See you then.